They asked the Chubby Maid's daughter to dance as a joke. What happened next shocked everyone. The Grand Lakes Hotel ballroom looked like something out of a dream. Chandeliers dripping crystal above a polished marble floor, silk-covered chairs in rows like a wedding rehearsal, and golden light pouring through the giant arched windows. But Ava Carter wasn't part of the dream. She stood at the edge of it, half in shadow, right where the banquet hall met the employee corridor. Her hoodie was zipped up to her chin. Her backpack hugged her front like a shield. "Just sit here," her mom had said earlier, wiping sweat from her neck with the inside of her sleeve. "Be quiet. Don't touch anything. I'll be done in 2 hours." That was before they noticed her. From the top of the ballroom's marble staircase, a voice sliced the quiet. "Hey, Ava," said Piper Hastings, sweet on the outside, sharp underneath. "Want to show us your special dance?" Ava didn't move. Piper stood perfectly balanced, her white ballet flats clicking lightly against the step, her hotel staff access lanyard swaying against her pink practice skirt. 2 other girls flanked her like backup dancers, both daughters of Grand Lakes management, both dressed for the showcase auditions happening later that week. Ava blinked slowly. She wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't her world. She knew that. She was only in the ballroom because her mom, Diane Carter, had gotten assigned to floor duty after the luncheon. There hadn't been anyone to watch Ava after school. Again, so she'd come along with the understanding that she'd stay hidden, out of sight, out of trouble. But now everyone was looking. Piper descended a step. "Don't be shy," she said, her voice lilting like it was all in fun. "We saw you dancing in the staff hallway last week." More giggles from the girls behind her. One whispered something that made the others snort into their hands. Ava looked down at her feet. The shoes again. Big, clunky, plain black, made shoes. Rubber soles. One side split just enough to make a flap. They were her mother's old pair. Ava had outgrown her own shoes a month ago, but there wasn't money for new ones. So Diane had given her these. "They don't slip," she'd said, trying to sound light. "And they're quiet." Ava hadn't said a word back. Now here she was, wearing them in a ballroom that cost more per hour than her mother made in 2 weeks. "I mean, you clearly love dancing," Piper continued. "You pirouette past the vending machines like it's Broadway." The jab was soft, but the room felt colder. Ava's hands gripped the edges of her sleeves. "She probably thinks she can audition," one of the other girls said loud enough for Ava to hear. "With those shoes. She should clean the stage before we perform," said another. "Get a real close look." Their laughter grew louder, sharp now, no longer pretending. From the far side of the ballroom, Diane stayed low, kneeling with a spray bottle in one hand and a rag in the other, scrubbing a faint lemonade stain from the marble tile. Her shirt clung to her back from sweat, but her hands didn't stop moving. Still, her eyes lifted, just once. She saw Piper. She saw Ava. She saw everything. But she kept scrubbing, because that's what the job demanded. And Ava knew. Her mom couldn't afford to speak. Behind her hoodie's front zipper, Ava's fingers touched the folded paper she had kept all week. A crumpled flyer pulled from a trash can near the elevators. Summer Youth Showcase. Open auditions for staff family. Someone had thrown it away. But Ava hadn't. She'd read it 20 times. Memorized the date. Dreamed of stepping on the stage for 5 minutes. Just 5. But now, under Piper's gaze, that dream felt like a joke she'd told herself to survive. Ms. Brooks, the hotel's event coordinator, walked by with a clipboard, heels echoing on the ballroom floor. She paused for a moment, watching the group. Her eyes passed over Ava, and then she kept walking. No one said a word. No one told Piper to stop. Ava didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just pressed the flyer tighter in her palm and took one slow step backward into the shadows of the curtain. Her mother's shoes made no sound at all. Diane's rag slapped the floor once hard. Then back to circles. Back to silence. The laughter faded, but not because anyone told them to stop. It just ran out of air. Ava didn't speak. She didn't retreat further. She stood exactly where she was, half in shadow, half in light. Her hoodie sleeves covering her fists, the old paper flyer crumpled in one hand like something alive. From the corner of the room, one of the younger hotel kids, a thin girl named Marcy whose mom worked in reservations, peeked up from her sketch pad. She'd been sitting cross-legged near the risers, ignored by the rest, unnoticed like Ava usually was. Now she stared, not at Piper, not at the girls, at Ava. "She's just watching," Marcy said softly, not loud enough to stop anything, but enough to be heard. Piper turned sharply, caught off guard by the interruption. "No one asked you, Marcy." Marcy dropped her eyes again. But the moment lingered. Something shifted. A thread pulled, tension flickering. Ava took a slow breath. She wasn't shaking. Not really. Her heart was beating fast, but not the kind of fast that meant fear. It was the kind that came before a race, before a leap, before a choice. The ballroom suddenly felt too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Across the room, Diane paused mid-scrub, her rag resting on the floor. She could feel the silence too, that specific stillness that always came right before someone got humiliated, or someone changed everything. She didn't dare look at Ava now. She couldn't afford to. Ava moved her hand to her side, unfolding the paper just a little. The words on the flyer were faded now, but she didn't need to read them. She already knew them by heart. Staff family welcome to audition. Any age, any background. She'd repeated those words in her head like a song. It had felt impossible at first, then foolish. But now, standing there with the whole room watching, it felt like something else entirely. I could. The thought wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like the beat of her mother's work shoes against tile. Like breath. Piper saw the motion, the paper in Ava's hand, and narrowed her eyes. "Are you seriously thinking about auditioning?" she asked, her voice rising with forced lightness. "That wasn't a real invite. It was, a kindness." She smiled, but this time it looked smaller. "Off. Besides, you'd need, shoes," she added, her gaze dropping to Ava's feet. The girls chuckled again, but now their laughter was uneven, unsure. Even the way Ava stood was different now. Not puffed up, not defensive, just grounded. Like her center had shifted lower, deeper, like her weight belonged where it was. Piper took a step closer. "You don't belong on that stage," she said, this time without the fake sugar. "Even if you could dance." Which, let's be real, she trailed off. Because Ava had moved. Not away, but forward. Just one step. Slow, soft, silent. Her mother's shoes made a small squeak against the marble. Just enough sound to cut the air. And that one step did something Piper hadn't planned on. It made her flinch. Ava didn't smile. Didn't blink. She just stood taller. Not perfectly. Not with trained posture or coached elegance, but with something older than that. Something earned. From the floor, Diane finally looked up. She didn't speak. She didn't signal. But her eyes shone in a way Ava hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't worry. It was recognition. The last time she saw that look was 3 years ago, when Ava had danced alone in the apartment living room at night, copying moves from a scratched library DVD. Diane had stood in the doorway that night too, quiet, holding a laundry basket, watching her daughter discover rhythm the way some kids discover fire. That same flame was flickering now, just beneath Ava's stillness. Piper glanced back at her friends, waiting for someone to echo her next insult. But they were quiet. Marcy still stared, her sketch pad now resting on her lap, forgotten. Ava spoke for the first time. Just 5 words. I have the right to. It wasn't loud, but it was like someone opened a window in the ballroom. Cold truth swept through. Piper blinked. What did you say? Ava held up the paper. Not all the way, just enough to show the words. The wrinkled corner of the flyer hung limp between her fingers. I said, Ava repeated calmly. I have the right to. Her voice didn't shake. Diane exhaled quietly from the floor. And for a second, just one heartbeat-long second, Piper looked unsure, like the power she thought she had wasn't where she left it. She forced a laugh. Okay, well then prove it, Piper said. If you're so sure you belong, dance. Right now. The girls gasped. Marcy sat straighter. Even Diane's rag froze mid-circle. The challenge was out now. And Ava? She just stared back, not blinking, as if the question had never scared her in the first place. The room waited for a laugh, a retreat, a flinch, anything that would make it all go back to how it was 5 minutes ago. With Ava quiet, small, invisible. But Ava didn't move backward. She stepped forward instead. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bold. It was deliberate. Like someone measuring the earth with each step. Her mother's black rubber made shoes squeaked against the ballroom marble again, soft but solid. Real, one girl whispered. Is she actually gonna do it? Piper smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're serious? Ava didn't answer. She took another step and slipped off her hoodie, folding it in half and setting it carefully beside the curtain. She stood in her plain t-shirt, the sleeves rolled slightly, arms bare and tense. Her pants were faded jeans. The shoes still didn't match the floor. But somehow, none of it looked out of place anymore. Marcy held her breath, sketchpad forgotten in her lap. Even Diane, still crouched by the banquet table, shifted her weight forward like she might need to stand. But didn't. Not yet. Ava rolled her shoulders back, just once. Then she closed her eyes. The room went quiet again. No music. No instructor. No mirrors. Just the ballroom. And her body. She moved. A single step, smooth diagonal. Then a controlled pivot, the toe of one foot tracing a silent arc across the polished floor. It wasn't perfect. Her weight pulled slightly on the landing. But it was intentional. Then came another move. A turn. Faster this time. A beat. A pause. Her foot stamped softly in rhythm. Not to a song, but to something deeper. Something remembered. Diane recognized it instantly. That pattern. That style. It was the same routine Ava had practiced silently in the living room, barefoot on the old linoleum. Late at night when she thought no one was watching. A blend of ballet, street rhythm, and instinct. No training. No coach. Just movement. Honest and alive. Piper laughed, a little too loudly. She watched a few TikToks and thinks she's Misty Copeland. But no one joined her. Because Ava kept going. A spin. A lift of the arm. A drop to one knee and a slow rise again. Her face didn't break. Her breathing stayed steady. There was something unshakable about the way she moved. Raw, yes, but powerful. One of the other girls leaned closer. Did you see that landing? Piper's eyes narrowed. It wasn't supposed to go like this. She had expected a stumble. A fall. Something they could upload and laugh about later. But instead, Ava was dancing. Really dancing. Without music. Without approval. Without anyone's permission. And the shoes, those clunky, cracked, Rubbermaid shoes, didn't ruin it. They amplified it. Every time the soles tapped against marble, it reminded everyone who she was, where she came from, and how far she'd come alone. Piper folded her arms. Okay, fine. You've got rhythm. So what? Anyone can move if they watch enough YouTube. That's not dancing. That's just copying. Ava stopped. just for a breath. Then, slowly, she knelt down and untied the old rubber shoes. She stepped out of them one by one, barefoot now on the hotel ballroom floor. She stood straighter. Marcy's voice came in a whisper. "She's not copying." And she wasn't. This time, Ava leapt forward into a full turn. Not textbook, not flawless, but fierce. The air shifted around her. There was no music, but everyone in the room could feel the beat. Her body remembered something deeper than choreography. Ava was speaking, not with words, with motion. Her arms moved like they knew what they were doing even if no one had taught them. Her core held steady. Her lines weren't academic, but they were real, earned, lived in. And when she landed that next spin, her foot sliding into a perfect line, even Piper couldn't pretend it was luck. "She's been practicing," one of the girls said under her breath. "For how long?" another whispered. Diane closed her eyes. She knew exactly how long. Every night. For months. Quietly, in corners. In silence. In rooms too small to spin in. While Diane worked overtime or folded laundry or cried in the hallway about bills, Ava had been building this. Bit by bit. Alone. Piper's face had gone stiff. She looked smaller now. Not in size. In certainty. Ava took one last slow turn, then stopped. Still barefoot. Still breathing heavy, but steady. Her hair clung to her forehead. Her hands relaxed at her sides. She looked directly at Piper. Not smug. Not angry. Just steady. Like someone who had nothing to prove, and proved it anyway. The room was silent. Even Ms. Brooks had returned to the doorway. Clipboard forgotten in one hand, her eyes narrowed and focused. Piper tried to speak, but her voice came out flat. I mean, it was okay. But no one responded, because Ava had said more without words than Piper had in a dozen speeches. And her shoes? Still sitting where she left them. Quiet, but no longer symbols of shame. They were part of the story now. They were how she got here. The room didn't clap. No one moved. Ava stood barefoot in the ballroom center, chest rising and falling, arms loose at her sides, eyes steady on Piper. It wasn't just that she danced. It was that she had done it without permission, without music, without asking, without trying to fit into their version of it. She had made the room hers. And now, for the first time, it was Piper who didn't know what to do. Ms. Brooks stepped forward from the doorway, her clipboard hanging at her side. Her heels clicked gently, but even she didn't want to break the silence too soon. Piper tried to laugh. "That's it," she said. "You're done." But her voice cracked on the last word. Ava tilted her head slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The question no longer belonged to her. It belonged to everyone else in the room now. The air had changed. The girls who'd laughed earlier were quiet now. Not just quiet, but watching. Really watching. The way people do when they see something they didn't expect and aren't sure what it means yet. Marcy picked up her sketchpad again. Not to fidget, but to draw. Piper's lips parted. She looked at the others for backup, but they weren't smiling anymore. In fact, one of the girls looked a little pale. Another was shifting uncomfortably, her arms crossed like she wanted to disappear. It was Ava's moment. But it was Piper who suddenly felt exposed. Ava took a slow step backward and picked up her mother's shoes. She held them in her hands, one by one, fingers running along the cracked soles like they mattered, like they weren't something to hide, but something earned. And then she spoke, low, clear, not loud. "I've danced in kitchens, in closets, in the hallway by the loading dock. I've danced in the break room while my mom folded napkins. I don't need a stage to know I'm a dancer." No one moved. She added, even quieter. "But now that I have one," she stepped forward again. Just one final step, the kind that seals a performance. and placed the maid's shoes side by side in the middle of the ballroom floor. Perfectly aligned. Not hidden. Framed. Diane, still crouched near the banquet table, finally rose to her feet, slowly, carefully, like she was afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too fast. She didn't walk over. She didn't interrupt. She just stood tall, her eyes wet, her back straight. Ava turned to face Ms. Brooks. The event director blinked, visibly taken off guard. She looked down at the flyer in Ava's hand, then back to the girl now standing barefoot and proud on her polished marble floor. "You said auditions are open to staff family," Ava said. Her voice still wasn't loud, but it was clear, like glass before it breaks. Ms. Brooks nodded, slowly, cautiously, like someone realizing the truth had been right there on a sign she approved herself and never really thought through. "Yes," she said. "That's correct." Piper shook her head, clinging to the last of her control. "She can't just, you can't seriously." She's not. But even her words were breaking apart now. No one looked at her. Everyone was looking at Ava. Even a few hotel staffers had stopped along the ballroom wall. One server with a tray of water stood frozen mid-step, his eyes locked on the girl who stood barefoot beside her mother's shoes like they were a badge of honor. Ava turned to Piper. "Finally, I'm not trying to take anything from you," she said. "I'm just done pretending I don't exist." That line cracked the air. Piper's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Because what could she say? What could she possibly say now that the whole room had seen what they saw? That the girl they tried to mock, tried to silence, tried to laugh off the stage, had stood her ground, had danced without apology, had turned their joke into something unforgettable. Ms. Brooks nodded, her voice quiet. "Ava Carter," she said, "please return tomorrow at 4 p.m. for your formal audition." Ava nodded once. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just bent down, picked up the maid's shoes, and walked back to her mother. Diane met her halfway. She didn't speak either. She just opened her arms and wrapped Ava in them. Not as a protector, not as a shield, but as a witness. As a mother who had scrubbed these floors so her daughter could someday walk across them. And now, she had. Not in silence, not in shame, but in power. No one spoke right away, even after Ms. Brooks gave the formal nod. Even after Ava turned and returned to her mother's side. The room just stood in the stillness of it, like they knew something important had just happened, but didn't yet know how to name it. Then a slow clap broke the silence. One pair of hands. Then another. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It was real. And it spread, like light into a room that had been dimmed too long. The girls who had laughed at Ava minutes earlier were now watching her like they had never really seen her before. One of them, the tall one with a blue clip in her hair, actually took a step toward her. "That was really good," she said, hesitant but honest. "Like seriously." Ava nodded once. Not dismissive, just accepting. Like truth didn't need to be big or dramatic. It just needed to be heard. Piper stayed where she was, arms folded tight, face locked in a neutral expression that couldn't decide between denial and disbelief. She looked smaller now, not because Ava had grown, but because the spotlight had shifted and it lit up everything Piper didn't want seen. Diane still hadn't spoken. She stood beside her daughter, one hand on Ava's shoulder, the other gripping the maid's shoes Ava had returned to her, shoes now sacred with meaning. Ms. Brooks took a slow step forward. "I had no idea," she said softly, eyes locked on Ava. "You've never had formal training?" Ava shook her head. "Only the hotel hallways. And some YouTube videos when the Wi-Fi works." Ms. Brooks' mouth lifted barely. "Well, you have something people can't teach." She looked over at Diane. "You must be incredibly proud." Diane swallowed hard. "I always was," she said. "But now they see what I already knew. The weight in that line settled over everyone. Ms. Brooks cleared her throat. I want you at that audition tomorrow, Ava. And after that, we'll talk scholarships if you're willing. We've never had a dancer like you in the program. Ava didn't smile, but her eyes shone in a way that hadn't earlier. She nodded. Thank you. Across the ballroom, someone whispered. She just flipped the whole room. And they were right. Piper suddenly stepped forward. Her voice was sharp, but shaky. So that's it? She just dances once and gets invited? That's not how it's supposed to work. Ms. Brooks turned to her calmly. Isn't it? Piper blinked. She didn't follow the rules. She followed the only rule that matters, Brooks said. She showed us something true. But I've trained for years. My mom pays for coaching and... Ms. Brooks held up a hand. Not to silence, but to reset. No one's taking anything from you, Piper. But talent isn't always found where we expect it. Piper's mouth opened, then closed. The room didn't argue, because the room had changed. Even Marcy, now sketching with purpose, looked at Ava like she was drawing a hero. Piper stepped back, her arms folding again. But it wasn't confidence now. It was armor. Thin armor. Ava took one final step toward the front. Her voice was soft. You thought I was here to take up space, she said, looking directly at Piper. But I was just waiting for my moment. Then she looked at Ms. Brooks. You said the program was for hotel staff families. I'm one. I live here too. I walk these halls every day. She gestured to the space. Not bitter, not loud. Just real. This is my stage just as much as anyone else's. Ms. Brooks looked around at the quiet room, at the daughters of executives, at the staff still watching from the edges, at Diane. Then she said the words that mattered. You're absolutely right. She turned to her assistant near the wall. Update the roster. Ava Carter is officially added to the audition list. And let's flag her for scholarship review. Piper said nothing, but she didn't look up again. She stared down at the same polished floor that had once felt like hers alone, and now felt unfamiliar under her feet. Ava stepped back to her mom. Diane handed her the maid's shoes, holding them like something sacred now. You danced like you meant it, she whispered. I did, Ava said quietly. I always do. And for the first time since entering that room, Ava smiled. Not for anyone else, just for herself. 3 months later, the ballroom looked the same. Chandeliers still shimmered. The marble still gleamed. But the energy felt different, like the floor itself remembered what happened there. Ava Carter stood in the back hallway again. Same hotel. Same corridor, but everything else had changed. She now wore soft ballet slippers, secondhand, donated by a guest after seeing her perform in the lobby showcase 2 weeks ago. Her hoodie had been replaced with a navy blue rehearsal jacket, embroidered with 3 stitched letters on the back. GLYDS, Grand Lakes Youth Dance Scholarship. She didn't hide behind curtains anymore. She walked the halls like she belonged. Because she did. Since her formal audition, Ava had performed twice for hotel guests. Once in the courtyard garden, once in the glass atrium. She'd been interviewed by the local paper under the headline, Housekeeper's Daughter Brings Down the Ballroom. People noticed, not just because of the story, because of the truth in the movement. Ms. Brooks followed through on everything she promised. Ava's name was the first on the newly expanded staff family scholarship list, and her photo now hung beside the audition table as an official program member. But the changes didn't stop there. The hotel quietly rewrote its youth program guidelines. They changed the dress code to allow affordable dance wear. They created a new policy that gave staff children access to rehearsal spaces during off-peak hours. And every new application now included a line that said, talent can come from any hallway. We're committed to finding it. The line was Diane's. She'd written it quietly, after Ms. Brooks asked her to review the first draft of the new policy. Diane Carter, who once scrubbed the ballroom floor in silence, now sat on the Staff Advisory Council, a role created specifically to include voices like hers in program decisions. She still cleaned, yes, but not invisibly anymore. She had a nameplate now, a badge with her title, Facilities Team Leader, and a folding chair with her name on it, placed right by the edge of the rehearsal stage during youth showcases. Ava always glanced at that chair before she danced, just to be sure her mother was there. And she always was. Piper never came back to the ballroom practices. Not for a while. Rumors said her parents took her out of the program for a month. Something about needing to reset. When she returned, she kept to herself, quieter, humbler. At the next audition cycle, she submitted her name again, and made it in. She danced beside Ava during the hotel's autumn gala. And when they finished, Piper turned, hesitated, and said just one thing. "You changed this place." Ava nodded. "You helped," she said. She meant it. Even resistance can shape change, if you push hard enough in the opposite direction. Sophia, the sketchpad girl Marcy, had drawn Ava's performance that first day in charcoal and pastel. Her drawing was now framed in the staff break room. Underneath it, a handwritten title. She danced anyway. The video? Yeah, someone had filmed it. One of the other girls, the one who had laughed, posted it online 2 weeks later. It wasn't edited. It wasn't framed as a joke. It simply read, "The moment we got it wrong." Over 200,000 views. Hundreds of comments. Not all were kind, but most were. Some said it reminded them of their own childhood, their own mothers, their own floors they once walked barefoot and afraid. Ava read every one of them. She never replied, but she danced a little harder each time. And now, 3 months later, she was preparing for the city's Winter Youth Festival. She was performing solo, not because she was the most technical, but because she was the most unforgettable. Ms. Brooks said so herself. "Some kids study movement," she told the hotel board. "But Ava moves meaning. There's a difference." As the ballroom lights dimmed for dress rehearsal, Ava took a deep breath in the wings. The floor crew cleared the center space. Diane sat in her folding chair, hands clasped tight, the maid's shoes resting on her lap. She still carried them, not because Ava needed them anymore, but because they needed reminding. Where this story began, and why it will never be forgotten. The old rehearsal room on the 3rd floor didn't get much sunlight. Piper Hastings sat cross-legged on the floor, alone, her pointe shoes in her lap. She hadn't tied them in weeks. Outside the door, music played softly. Ava's solo rehearsal for the winter festival echoing down the corridor. Piper didn't move. She just listened. Each turn, each pause, each breath that filled the space and held it. She remembered standing on that ballroom staircase, so sure of herself, so ready to laugh. She hadn't thought it would end like this. Not with her on the sidelines. Not with Ava on the posters. She glanced down at the shoes in her hands. They were spotless. New. Never worn outside the studio. Her parents paid for private classes again, after all the noise died down. But the spark was gone. Somewhere along the way, it had slipped through her fingers. What Piper had thought was hers by default was never really hers at all. Ava had danced without music, and the world had leaned in. That thought stayed with her, a quiet line she couldn't shake. She stood up, shoes still in hand, and pressed her forehead to the glass window overlooking the ballroom far below. She saw Diane's folding chair, and Ava, spinning across the floor, barefoot free. Piper didn't cry, but she stayed at that window until the music stopped. They asked the maid's daughter to dance as a joke, but she danced like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to make that mistake. Ava never needed a spotlight. She needed a moment. And when it came, she didn't just take it, she transformed it. She showed them what power looks like when it doesn't ask for permission. What happens when dignity stands where mockery was expected. What it means when someone rises, not to silence others, but to finally be heard. And in her mother's worn shoes, she left a trail across the floor that no one could erase. Because true talent doesn't need permission. It doesn't need perfect shoes or perfect parents. It needs space. Just enough space to take one honest step forward. So the next time someone like Ava walks into your room, quiet, overlooked, underestimated, ask yourself, are you looking at a joke? Or are you standing in the presence of a revolution? Because sometimes the most powerful dancers come from the quietest corners. And sometimes the floor doesn't belong to who owns it, but to who earns it.